What if, by this weekend, the United States launched a military strike on Iran? Not a rumor. Not speculation. According to multiple sources, it's a real possibility being discussed at the highest levels of the US government right now.
Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, stick around, because today we're breaking down one of the most significant and fast-moving geopolitical stories of 2025. The United States military is reportedly ready to strike Iran, and the decision could come as early as this weekend. But here's the thing, no final call has been made yet. President Trump is reportedly weighing both sides, talking to advisors, polling allies, and, according to people close to the situation, spending a lot of time thinking about this. So, what's actually going on? What does this mean for the Middle East, for Iran's nuclear ambitions, and for the rest of the world? Let's break it down, step by step.
Let's start with the basics. What do we actually know? According to sources familiar with the matter, the U.S. military has been quietly but significantly building up its forces in the Middle East over the past several days. We're talking air assets, naval power, refueling tankers, fighter jets, all being repositioned and moved closer to the region. Some of those Air Force assets are reportedly being moved from bases in the United Kingdom, which tells you just how far-reaching this buildup really is. And the crown jewel of it all? The USS Gerald Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier group in the entire U.S. arsenal, could arrive in the region as soon as this weekend. When you deploy the Gerald Ford Strike Group, you're not sending a subtle message. That is one of the most powerful tools in America's military toolbox. Now, the White House has been briefed that the military could be ready to act by the weekend. But, and this is important, President Trump has not made a final decision. One source described the president as having privately argued both for and against military action. He's been reaching out to advisors and even foreign allies to get a sense of what the right move is. So we have a military that's ready. And a president who is still deciding.
Here's where things get really interesting. Because even as all of this military hardware is moving into position, there's also a diplomatic effort quietly happening in the background. Just this week, American and Iranian negotiators met indirectly in Geneva, Switzerland. They didn't sit in the same room. Instead, they exchanged written messages, passing notes back and forth for nearly 3.5 hours. That's a long time to pass notes. But at the end of it, no clear resolution. Iran's chief negotiator came out saying that both sides had agreed on a set of broad guiding principles. The American side, however, was more cautious, noting there were still a lot of details left to work through. Which, if you read between the lines, means they're not exactly on the same page yet. Then there's Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, who briefed the president on those talks. And top national security officials held a meeting in the White House Situation Room to go over the Iran situation in detail. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt addressed reporters and acknowledged that Iran was expected to present more details on its negotiating position in the coming weeks. But when asked directly whether Trump would hold off on military action during that window, she wouldn't commit. She made clear that while diplomacy is always the first option, a military strike remains very much on the table. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is reportedly set to travel to Israel on February 28 to meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and give him an update on where the Iran talks stand. So we have two tracks running simultaneously, one military, one diplomatic, and the clock is ticking.
Now let's talk about what Iran is doing during all of this, because it's not just sitting still. New satellite imagery analyzed by the Institute for Science and International Security shows that Iran is actively fortifying several of its nuclear facilities. How? By using concrete and massive amounts of soil to bury key sites deeper underground. The goal, it seems, is to make those facilities harder to destroy even with the kind of heavy-duty munitions the U.S. military has access to. Think about that for a second. Iran isn't waving a white flag. It's hardening its defenses in real time, even as it sends negotiators to Geneva. That's a country that's preparing for the possibility of a strike while simultaneously trying to talk its way out of one. This is the fundamental tension at the heart of this story. Iran wants to negotiate, but it's also not willing to appear weak or vulnerable. And the US is moving military assets into position, but hasn't pulled the trigger yet.
Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in these situations. Timing matters enormously. And right now, there are several major events on the calendar that could influence when or whether any strike happens. First, the Winter Olympics just wrapped up on Sunday. Traditionally, the Olympics are seen as a moment of global unity, and some European officials reportedly believed that no strike would happen before the closing ceremonies. That window has now passed. Second, and this is significant, Ramadan began this week. Ramadan is the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, observed by over 1 billion Muslims around the world. Several U.S. allies in the Middle East, countries that have been lobbying against a military strike, worried about regional destabilization, have signaled that an attack during Ramadan would be seen as deeply disrespectful. That's not just a cultural concern. It's a strategic one. The U.S. needs those regional partners. Alienating them at a sensitive religious moment could have serious diplomatic consequences. Third, President Trump is delivering his State of the Union address on Tuesday. Advisors have reportedly indicated it's likely to serve as a launchpad for Trump's message heading into the midterm political season, focused primarily on domestic issues. A major military strike right before or right after that address would completely reshape the political landscape. Whether Trump is factoring any of these events into his thinking is unclear. But they're all hanging in the background as the decision looms.
For years, really for decades, Iran's nuclear program has been one of the central flashpoints of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The core fear has always been the same: if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, it fundamentally changes the balance of power in the region. It would almost certainly trigger a nuclear arms race, with countries like Saudi Arabia potentially seeking their own deterrent. Trump, in his public statements over recent weeks, has made clear that he views Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon as a red line. He's also hinted at something more ambitious, a desire for regime change in Tehran. But here's the problem: he hasn't clearly defined what the objective of a military strike would be. Is it to set back the nuclear program by a few years? Is it to force Iran back to the negotiating table? Is it something more sweeping? That ambiguity is a real concern, not just for analysts and foreign governments, but for the American public and Congress, who have largely not been brought into this conversation. There's been no major speech laying out the case. No clear articulation of what success looks like. Just a military buildup, some indirect diplomatic exchanges, and a president who's still making up his mind. The U.S. allies in the Middle East who have been lobbying against a strike aren't doing so because they like Iran. They're doing it because they know what regional destabilization looks like, and they don't want to live through it again. A strike on Iran wouldn't happen in a vacuum. Hezbollah, Iranian-backed militias across Iraq and Syria, Houthi forces in Yemen, all of these groups could activate in response, potentially pulling multiple countries into a wider conflict. That's the scenario everyone is trying to avoid. And it's why even the people who think a strike might eventually be necessary are urging caution about the how and the when.
So where does this leave us? Here's the honest answer: we don't know what happens next. And that uncertainty, that's not a media failure, that's not a gap in reporting. That's the actual situation. A president who is genuinely undecided. A military that is ready but waiting. Diplomats who are talking but haven't reached a deal. And a region full of countries watching nervously, hoping cooler heads prevail. What we do know is this: the stakes are extraordinarily high. A military strike on Iran would be one of the most consequential military decisions made by a U.S. president in decades. It could reshape the Middle East. It could trigger a wider war. Or, depending on how it's executed and what follows, it could change the nuclear equation in a fundamental way. Nobody knows for certain which of those outcomes would follow. What's clear is that the next few days, possibly even the next few hours, could be decisive. The USS Gerald Ford is en route. The military is on standby. Diplomats are still talking. And the world is watching. This is a story we'll be following very closely, and I'll bring you updates as they come.
If you found this breakdown helpful, do us a favor, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who want clear, calm, no-nonsense analysis of major world events. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a great time. Because stories like this don't slow down, and neither do we. Drop a comment below and let me know. Do you think the US will strike Iran, or will diplomacy win out? I read every comment, and I genuinely love to hear what you think. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious. I'll see you in the next one.